there we have it. Our moose here is tooled into the leather. I did switch the camera to the other side since I am right-handed. Hopefully this will give a better view of what I'm doing now that camera's on my left side. So now at this point, we're going to get our handy dandy mallet or maul, and we're going to start tooling the object into the leather. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just grab one of our beveling tools here. This in particular is the B197, and what we're going to do is use this to emboss the piece of leather. Now, you may need some object to, when things are this small, some kind of heavy object to hold it in place. In this case, I've got this little like mini anvil, which I use, primarily when I need to do different types of rivets and things like that, where I need it to, I can't do it here. I've got to have it drape or whatever. This is what I use a little mini anvil for, but it's also great to do that and to hold things in place for me. So let's get to tooling. So I'm just going to use that edge to hold it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this beveler, and wherever this edge here on the sloped end, the high end of this, if I place it here, that means it's going to press down this side of the leather, which will cause the opposite side, this side, to appear to raise up. So I'm just going to do this line here, this upper area, try to keep my arms out of the way as best I can, and I'm just going to follow the markings. And since we cut into the leather with our swivel knife, it's given a groove for this bevel to kind of ride along in. Okay? Yeah, already my hands are covering this up too, aren't they? And now I'm doing these rapid small strikes, and I'm slowly moving this around. I'm not making big sweeping movements. I'm just being very gentle with it, very minor movements. Because what can happen is if the leather is too wet, if you make really fast movements with this beveler as you're striking and just doing little strikes, you're going to get this like stepping, and you'll see the strikes. Where in this, you can probably already tell we've embossed that. We've brought out this piece by knocking this background area back a little bit. And as additionally, we're not getting too much stepping. There's a little bit, but when you have just a bit of stepping, you can take your tool and just kind of rub it through, using the edge of this as a guide. And there we go. And this is that moment where you're going to get rid of a lot of those that wobbliness that we had before. A lot of that's going to start getting camouflaged in our beveling. Okay. And there we go. And that's it. That's really all there is to beveling. Again, I'm just going to run this over like that. And there we have it. We have now tooled a little bit and beveled that edge there. So what I'm going to do, I'll finish out this portion and I'll do the head here. And hopefully I'll have enough time real quick to then show you how to do some backgrounding. So what we're going to do is this area here, we're actually going to use another one of our beveling tools to knock it back and give it some texture, and just kind of do some fun things like that. Okay, so let's do this. So one thing I want to talk about, we mentioned how with our swivel knife, we did this tapering edges with that. So we're going to do something very similar when we tool, when we bevel this. I'm going to do very light strikes and then get heavier as I go along. So almost nothing. And then big strikes. I'm going to go over this section we just did. So as you can see, because of the way we did that, since we did these first and we went over it on the snout, it's going to push this section back and bring that snout forward. And I went very light there. So it can do that same feeling where it's going to make that snout really start to come forward. So same thing here. The harder I strike it, the deeper the impression is going to be, and the more it's going to appear to come out. Boop. All right. Same thing here. There, almost non-existent strikes, and then really start to strike it. There we have it. So now we've got the snout, and it's going to look like it's coming out from the rest of this. And so that's just a simple tooling there. We're going to finish up this portion here. We're going to do that off camera, and then the rest of the moose head. So following all those basically same ideas. We're going to bevel along here. So that way this antler, both these antlers are going to seem to pop off from behind this, and then the head and all those kind of things. And then we'll background, and we'll come back for that. So stay tuned for backgrounding. And there we have it. There is our moose head all tooled in to the leather. All right. So our next step is we want to background this area. Just one more thing to pop this moose head off the background. But before we do that, there's a couple of things I did want to mention. So we've been casing our leather with water to get these impressions really good. We want really tight lines, really clean lines. A couple of things to look out for. If your leather's not ready, if it's still too wet, these lines are going to be really mushy. So as you're tooling along, you may notice they get a little really bendy and they're going to be really wobbly. If you see that, stop. Wait for that leather to dry a bit more, that top grain, and then start again. Now I have several different types of backgrounders. These are just tools that basically are going to have these teeth on them. And they're just going to add a lot of really nice texture to your piece. Okay. Focus back in on our guy here. So I'm doing a lot of manual focusing. I don't want the autofocus on because it can get really messy with this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of movement, a lot of things can get really wild when it's trying to focus. So all right, so we're going to use this backgrounder here. I think it's going to be a nice one. Just going to place that on there, and really you just kind of move it around. The reason why you want to keep it moving around is because you don't want it to be able to tell that it's this kind of square area. So you're trying to hide that. So you'll spin this thing around and okay. If you find that as you're working, the impressions aren't taking as well as you would like, or that it's like, wow, it was worked really well in this beveled area, but as I've moved through the piece, the impressions aren't holding in the leather like I would want, that's probably because the moisture throughout the piece has dried out quite a bit. So you'll need to recase the leather, and that's perfectly fine to do in the middle of your project. I've found that's generally the case on much bigger pieces, but this one has been pretty good so far. The nice thing about this backgrounding too is when we dye this, that leather, or the dye, is going to get trapped in these holes, and it's going to make it darker, which is going to be really nice when we do that. Okay, so we've done that, we've backgrounded those. So the next thing I want to do actually is a bit of like contouring, a little bit of just a little detailing work. So I'm going to use these kind of these little spoons, and using the back side of this spoon, I can actually find areas where maybe the corners are a little too angular in pieces, and I can actually run this back of this spoon across it and kind of bevel the edges a little bit so they're not so angular. And it's a nice little detail thing. You can just punch up little areas here and there. when you don't want things too stepped, if you will. In addition to that, I can take the more pointed edge, and in these areas where I still want it to be kind of recessed, I'm going to run it through and kind of almost make like hash marks. Hatching, if you will. I'm just going to do that lightly. Well, hard here in the where it's darker, and work my way out. It's just, again, something to kind of knock this back. You can look at other illustrations on different websites. Just go look and look up hatching, just to kind of get an idea of what that should look like. It's going to be kind of a subtle thing, but it'll be nice. Nice little detail. Especially with these horns where that horn wants to have a different type of texture than say the face. And even with that said, I'm gonna take my stylus, which I just had over here. That's why I always try to, there you go. I always try to put it back in my little holder here. Sometimes I forget. But I want to take my stylus and I'm just gonna make some lines through here. Again, they're just kind of subtle. But I wanted to get the feeling of some texture in the horn that's different from the face. And again, I'll take another one of my backgrounders here. Let's see, what are you? An A114. And I'm just gonna do right in the ears here. And it's a little bit of a different type of backgrounder. So it's not gonna bleed into what I did here. I want those to have a different look. Okay. Let's do a little bit more in the horns. I even have a beveler that has a texture to it. So I think I'm gonna just punch a little bit into these parts of the horn, to the antler. Again, just to pop the front portion off of that back a little bit more. Just knock it back. Just trying to use all these little methods to add a bit of detail. It's those little subtle things that people might not notice right off the bat, but it really makes the piece stand out. Okay. So there it is. That is our tooled in moose head. This is going to be the portion that goes over his shoulder. So it's going to actually be bent like that. And then this portion will be riveted in there. But you'll see how that goes across. And we'll get a little bit of a closer look here. Of that backgrounding. We'll even get, so there you go. You can see how all that contouring is going to look real nice when we get the dye on there. All right, so that's going to be really exciting to do. So the rest of the pieces, we're not going to worry about doing on camera. I think we've, got everything we need to know on how to bevel with this one piece, because this is a pretty intricate piece. I will say this is kind of a little bit more advanced piece because it's small and it has these smaller areas. My suggestion is when you first start off tooling designs, try to go for something a little bit bigger and then work smaller and smaller as you go in. If you're going to start off small, it might be pretty frustrating because it can be hard to get the beveling into these little tinier areas. There we have it. Everything is tooled out that we're going to have for this project. So there's a couple of notes I wanted to say before we end this section of the project. As you notice, this stuff is kind of curled up, and that's because of the water. It's going to just cause those things to curl a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about that ruining the project, ruining the leather. As you work with it more, and eventually we're going to mold it around the body and all those kinds of things, and all that stuff will eventually work itself out. So don't worry, as your stuff's going to curl a little bit with the water. Another thing I wanted to mention before I move on, every time you're going to do a bit of tooling, especially true, say, for where just this head is or just this spot, don't wet just the area that you're going to be tooling. You want to wet the entire project. You want to get an even distribution of the water. The reason being is that water can actually change the coloration when you put dye on it. So say if I just put some water here, later I can go in and I'll put dye down and it might actually be darker or lighter in those particular areas. And you'll start to see where that happened. So always remember that. Always put water across the entire piece. Even if I'm just going to be tooling this, I want to wet the entire thing and then tool that area. Okay? So there we have it. Last note, I know I did these off camera, but believe me, there isn't anything I did with these that I didn't also do with this piece that we did on camera. I used my swivel knife, cut into the lines we made, and then just went in with that same beveler that I used here and just beveled those edges. And it's just, some nice detail areas to spruce things up a bit. Like we said before, this is going to go over the shoulder, and this will just wrap around it. And it's just a nice little detail just to punch it up a bit. Okay, so next we're going to be dealing with our edges. If you saw my video where I talk about the tools I think you're going to need, one thing I mentioned is I think a project really sets itself apart from other projects by what you do with the edges. So what we're going to be doing is slicking these down, doing some beveling on the edges to get rid of the sharp edges here, and just really kind of rounding everything out and giving it a really nice, clean, and finished look. Okay, we really hope you have enjoyed this project so far and are enjoying the series and what we do here, and we're really glad that you've decided to come learn with us. Let's get to the next part.